Hi, so this week, when I decided to add some JavaScript, the first thing that I did was I actually wound up going in and really improving this table that I'd put on my teacher page. Before, I had forms for each sort of space for each part of the rubric, and the idea was people were going to write in numbers, but it was really hard to format. Bootstrap just did not like it at all, so instead, I added another column and put the forms in there. And for whatever reason, I tweaked it a little bit. I think I like maybe because the whole thing was no longer surrounded by a form div, which it had not liked. It just worked much better and was very nicely lined up, and I didn't have to do any custom CSS to make it lined up nicely. For these forms, they're buttons. They have the value of number, so they also have this little thing on the side here, so someone could actually enter numbers this way as well. That is automatic. That's part of Bootstrap. So here's what I did is, let's just put in a few names. So the idea is this is some kind of rubric for grading, and we could imagine that it was, imagine it's very complicated. It's much bigger. It's, 20 lines long, maybe more. Even you could even have more different scores. Something where it would be nice for a teacher to just sort of click through and think about it and then be able to record different student scores on this assessment. So you can type in a name, and then you can either click or you can press tab to get to the next box. Let's say I did really well in this, so I'm going to give myself 3 threes, and then you press record, and there's your score. And then let's do somebody else. Let's just say Sam, and we'll give him, he didn't do quite as well. Let's say 1, record. So then at first I was thinking, oh, what if you mess up and you forget someone's name or you forget their score? You need to be able to remove the last row or sort of edit it in some way. And that was going to be really tricky to do. So I realized pretty quickly that I didn't necessarily have the capacity to do that, and so instead I started thinking through what the user actually needed, and what I realized they just shouldn't be able to, I should make these forms required. They just shouldn't be able to submit without having a student name and a value in every single box. And there is an HTML5 attribute of required. It wasn't going to work perfectly in this case for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want to have a submit button here because you need a submit button to have a required form attribute, or at least that's what I saw. I'm not 100% positive about that, but it looked like that. But if you have a submit button, it resets your page every time you press it, and I didn't want to reset the page because that would erase what you had recorded. I just wanted to add another line. So instead, we'll go look in a second, I wrote some JavaScript to basically halt the function that I was calling the addup function, which we'll see, and give you an alert. I use the alert function that is built in. So here, I'll just show you. So let's say you forgot to put in the student's name, but you went and you scored them, and you press record, and you get a nice box. Oh, I just realized you guys can't see that because that is that is an OBS error. Let me see if I can add that real quick. Window capture. Let's see. Let's try one of these. Nope. Okay, we're not going to worry about that too much. Sorry, guys. Trust me, if you go look at my site, you will see that a little pop-up box says missing name or score, and then you press OK. Maybe next week I'll figure out how to do that on OBS. And so you can go back, and now you can put in your student's name. Use my daughter's name. I guess she didn't do very well on this assignment. And you can record. And then the same thing happens if you leave out one of the scores. So I was pretty happy with that. Definitely a lesson learned about how much work it is to do something that is pretty basic, because I really just added JavaScript to this form, and I spent a lot of time on it. There were a lot of The beginning was especially frustrating. I think it took the most time just to figure out the very first thing I wanted to do, which was to add up these scores. And then probably the next part that was the hardest was figuring out how to add additional lines to this. But really the first part was the hardest, and then things started to go better. I don't know why, maybe I just got better at thinking through the steps. And at first it was hard to sort of think through them very methodically. So let's go look at my JavaScript. So here is my JavaScript hosted on GitHub. I was very happy that I had wound up using GitHub the week before, so I didn't also have to learn how to use this week. And I actually wound up doing all of my code writing this week in Atom, ATOM, which is a site that was created by GitHub. So they're very nicely integrated. And I really liked it. And I found it pretty easy to set up, and it worked really well for me. I had to learn a few things about it, but still, it saved me so much time, and it just was I found a nicer way to write code than JS Fiddle or Plunker. So I would recommend it. So the very first thing I did was I worked on this function right here, which is the add up scores function, because that was sort of the first thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to say, okay, I wanted to add up the contents of those 3 boxes and then print the total. And eventually, I obviously wanted to print the student name and the total, but I thought I would just start with printing the total on that text area I had created for it. And you can see here that I use a for loop, which I guess you guys, I wound up learning this week, but everyone will be looking at who hasn't next week. And it's pretty straightforward. The idea is you have an array, and I have a name value. We can go look at that in a minute, but I have a name value for each of my little forms in my rubric that is rubric score, and so it finds those 3, and it starts the variable total starts at 0, and then it iterates through each for I equals 0 until while I is less than the length of the array, add 1. And if parsint basically turns whatever it's grabbing into an integer, because these are not integers. They're not necessarily integers already, so you sort of have to. I googled around and found this. This is like sort of the best way to grab a value from a form. You're getting the value and you're turning it into an integer of the whatever's in the array at place I. So it basically gets 0, 1, and 2 in this case, and then takes total and adds whatever that value is. And then down here, oh yeah, and I'm trying to remember there was one important thing about where I put things. I'm not remembering that right now, but this took a while for me to figure out. I think one, it was figuring out the parse int part, took forever, because I was just trying to do it for the for loop and just sort of adding these parts up, and also figuring out, I think I understand the document dot get elements, or get elements by name, get elements by ID. I used different get functions a lot. I think we'll see, and I think I understand how to use them a little bit better, even if I don't I don't understand the concept necessarily as well as I hope to, but I understand how to use them. And then I use the print log function that Jen used in the Tinker, which I used that here. I pretty much just borrowed that. I added it in as a helper function, but as you'll see, I wound up changing that. That was sort of my starting place, and then I wound up changing it. So I printed it out, and that was like sort of that was the ID for the text area where it was going to be printed, and here's what I want printed out. So then my next step was to include the student name. So I actually wrote a separate function called getStudent, where it's just getting that name and getting it to print, and that is what this does. And so here, instead of using I figured out that instead of using print log, I could just use the document query selector to sort of, because I didn't need to print it out here, I just wanted to get it. So I have the function getStudent, and it finds where people type in the name, and it gets the value of that, which is another thing I had to figure out, which is tricky, and assigns it to another variable. And then this does print it out. It assigns that value plus a space to again this part of the ID scorecard, which is the text area. So then I decided I made another function, which is down here, which is my real function, or actually this was my real function for a while, and I thought this was going to do everything for me. And it's my function reports scores, and it gets the student, and then it figures out the total, and it prints out the name plus the total, and then presses return, so it gets you to the next line, which was important. And then I wrote a function called reset rubric because this is the last thing that I forgot to tell you guys that it does. This is cool. You'll notice that after you type in a name and some scores, it resets. That had to be written as well, that it should get rid of all the text. So that's what reset does, reset rubric. And so then I thought I was pretty much done. I thought, and then I was going to move on to something else. And then that was when I thought of the idea that, of course, what if people mess up? So after more work, even, I wound up creating this, which basically separately checks each box. This is an array that finds the value of each of these different text boxes, and it says if A is empty, or B is empty, or C is empty, or D is empty. And I had to figure out that I had to use the two equal signs. I had to remember that I'm not assigning a value, I'm looking for an exact match. To use an alert box, this is a built-in function that will get you will pop up a box that you have to say okay. And this general part I found where I made it a little more complicated, where you can sort of define a value and then have an alert, and then if you return false, it will not let the function run that was going to run. And that's my report scores function. And so basically I wrote it to check for these values, and then if all the values were there, it would run report scores, which is this whole function up here, which is several sub-functions. And if it didn't have all these values, it would return false. It would have the alert box, and you would select OK, and then it would have not run the function, and you'd be able to fill in your missing values and then submit those. So while people cannot remove their previous values, so if they made a mistake, they realized they should have given them a different grade, this does not solve that problem. That is more complicated, and I, hope someday to understand that, but I don't yet. But this will at least keep them from submitting a grade that doesn't have a person attached, or from missing some of the boxes. So it felt like a lot of work, and I feel like I learned a lot. I definitely wish I had done more planning at the beginning for I wish I did do some breaking down of how this function was going to work, but I wish I'd thought through sort of the user experience piece first. I think that would have helped me. I maybe would have realized that instead of making it a text area, I should have made it a list. That was something I thought of near the end. And if I'd made it a list, I actually think I could have made it so you could delete any one of them. I probably could have had a box next to them, and if you selected it, you could remove that. I thought about trying to figure out how to make them an array where with each one you add the array, but I just, given what I'd already started and what I'd done, I was sort of at a certain place and I didn't know how to get out of it. I had to kind of keep going down that path. I guess it also made me realize how much programming is really sort of trying to think through your entire project, because there's always more than one way to accomplish something, that it's, at least small parts of something. And sometimes if you do it one way, you're then going to have challenges later on that would have been much easier to resolve if you had done it a different way. So that is what I learned this week.